My son shaved his sister's head while she slept before prom, and it was the best thing he ever did. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds cruel, impossible, unforgivable. And if you had asked me that morning, before I knew the truth, I would have said the exact same thing. I woke up to my teenage daughter Dilia's screams tearing through the house. They were not normal screams. They were the kind that make your body move before your mind can understand what is happening. I ran down the hall in my bare feet, my heart already pounding, and when I reached her bedroom, I froze in the doorway. Delia was sitting upright on her bed, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Her long dark hair, the hair she had spent years growing and taking care of, was scattered across her pillow in sheets like something from a nightmare. Her head was completely shaved. For one horrible second, I could not process what I was seeing. Then she turned toward me, touched her bare scalp with shaking hands, and screamed even louder. She kept saying Micah had done it, her little brother. My 8-year-old son, who still wore dinosaur pajamas, still asked me to check under his bed for monsters, and still followed Delia around the house like she was the most fascinating person alive. Delia stumbled into the bathroom, saw herself in the mirror, and broke down all over again. Prom was in 9 hours. She had been talking about that night for months. She had her dress steamed and hanging on the back of her closet door. Her makeup appointment was scheduled. Her boyfriend Colton had ordered a corsage. She had even been told she was probably going to be crowned prom queen. And now, standing under the harsh bathroom light with her scalp shining and her hands shaking against the sink, she looked like her entire world had just collapsed. I yelled for my husband and demanded to know where Micah was. He found him sitting on his own bed, quiet and pale, with the electric clippers still sitting on his nightstand. He looked tiny in those dinosaur pajamas, his knees pulled up to his chest, like he had been waiting for the consequences to catch up with him. "Micah, what did you do?" I asked, trying not to scream, but my voice still came out sharp enough to make him flinch. From the bathroom, Delia was crying so hard it sounded like she was choking. Micah looked down at his hands and said, in that small voice he used when he knew he was in trouble but still believed he had done the right thing, "I had to stop her from going to prom." I stared at him. This was my baby. This was the same little boy Delia had taught to tie his shoes the previous summer. The same little boy who asked her to read to him at night and saved half his Halloween candy for her because she liked the sour ones. I could not understand how he could do something so vicious to the sister he adored. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to punish him. I wanted to comfort my daughter. I wanted to wake up and find out none of it was real. But before I could even decide which disaster to handle first, the doorbell rang downstairs. Colton let himself in like he always did on Saturday mornings. He had been dating Delia for almost a year, and he had become so familiar in our house that I barely noticed when he came through the front door anymore. I heard him calling up the stairs about corsage colors, then his footsteps came closer, casual and confident, until he reached the bathroom doorway and stopped dead. His eyes landed on Delia's shaved head, and for a second his face twisted into something that was not concern. It looked like anger, or disgust, or maybe panic. Then he rearranged it quickly and said, "What the hell happened to your hair?" Delia only cried harder. Colton stepped forward, pulled her against him, and said in a softer voice, "Baby, don't cry. We can fix this. Maybe we can get you a nice wig. You'll still be the prettiest girl there." But while he said it, his eyes moved to me like this was somehow my fault. Then he looked toward the hallway and said, "Did Micah do this? I always said that kid was strange. This is psychotic, Mrs. Hale." Micah appeared in the bathroom doorway behind me. He was still barefoot, still in those dinosaur pajamas, but his face had changed. He looked scared, but also determined in a way I had never seen before. "I cut off all her hair so she couldn't go to prom with you," he said. "Because you're mean to her," I snapped. "Micah!" But he did not stop. He stepped farther into the bathroom and pointed at Colton. "You hurt my sister all the time. I see the purple marks on her arms where you grab her too hard." Everything went silent. Even Delia stopped sobbing for half a second. Colton laughed, but the sound was wrong, forced and thin. "Kids make up crazy stories, Mrs. Hale," he said. "Tell her, Delia. Tell your mom how good I am to you." Delia stared at the floor. She did not say a word. I felt something cold spread through my chest. Micah kept going. "I have pictures on Mommy's phone from when Delia was sleeping," he said, his voice getting stronger. "You push her into walls. You hit her tummy where nobody can see. Then you buy her stuff after so she won't tell." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. I did not even know what I was looking for until I opened my photos and started scrolling. Then I saw them. Close-ups of Delia's arms. Finger-shaped bruises. Dark purple marks along her ribs. Blotches on her skin that had clearly been hidden under clothing. I felt my stomach drop so fast I thought I might be sick. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Delia, is this true?" Colton's face was turning red. "Those could be from anything. he said quickly. She plays soccer. This is insane. I spend a fortune on her. I'm taking her to prom in a limo. My husband appeared behind me and looked over my shoulder at the photos. His whole body went tense. I asked Delia again, "Baby, why didn't you tell me?" She still would not look up. Colton's hand tightened around Delia's arm. I saw it that time. I saw his fingers press into the very same place where the bruises were. "We're leaving right now," he said. "This is completely ridiculous. Get dressed, Delia," Micah said, very quietly. "She can't go anywhere if she's too embarrassed about her hair. That's why I shaved it all off while she was sleeping, so she'd have to stay home safe." Colton changed tactics so fast, it made my skin crawl. His voice went sweet and patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "Micah, sometimes me and Delia play rough when we're messing around. It's not what it looks like. It's just how couples are. You're too young to understand boyfriend-girlfriend stuff." My husband stepped fully into the bathroom and said, "Let go of my daughter right now." Colton did not let go immediately. He looked at my husband, then at me, then back at Micah, like he was calculating how much we knew. Then Micah said, "But then you said the thing, mister." We all turned toward him. He reached down and touched the cheap little smartwatch we had given him for his birthday. It could count steps, call 2 emergency numbers, and record voice memos. I had thought it was just a toy. Micah pressed the screen, and Colton's voice came out tiny but clear. Micah said he had recorded it the day before, when Colton was waiting in our living room for Delia to get ready. The voice on the watch said, "Yeah, tomorrow night after prom. I'm going to get her completely out of it at Owen's after party so she can't say no this time. Already got what I need from my brother. Time to lock that down before college. Nothing keeps a girl around like a baby." I felt the bathroom tilt around me. Delia made a sound I will never forget. A wounded, broken noise that did not even sound human. She tried to pull away from Colton, but he held on tighter for one more second before finally letting go. "That's fake," Colton said, but sweat had broken out on his forehead. "You're all crazy. That's not even my voice. This whole family is insane." I stared at him, at this boy who had sat at our dinner table, eaten our food, smiled at me, called me Mrs. Hale, and all the while had been hurting my daughter and planning something even worse. "You were going to do that to my daughter?" I whispered. My whole body was shaking with a kind of rage I had never felt before. "You were going to hurt my baby?" Colton started backing toward the door, but my husband moved faster and blocked the only exit with his body. I could see the muscles in his jaw clenching. Colton tried to sound threatening, but his voice cracked. "You don't want to do this," he said. "My dad's a lawyer. You touch me and I'll ruin your whole family." My husband took one step forward, and Colton suddenly stopped panicking. He looked at my husband and said in the coldest voice I had ever heard from a teenager, "I really don't think you want to do that, Mr. Hale, and I think you know why." My husband's face changed. The color drained from his skin, and his hands began to shake. Colton saw it and smiled. Whatever he had on my husband, it was enough to make him step back. The bathroom felt too small, too hot, too crowded with fear and anger, and my daughter's ragged breathing behind me. I pushed myself between them and pulled out my phone. My fingers were trembling so hard I almost dropped it, but I hit record and held it up where Colton could see the red light blinking. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I told him to get out of our house right now, or I was calling 911. Colton laughed and said his father would destroy us. He said we had no idea who we were messing with. Then he shoved past my husband hard enough to make him stumble into the wall. I kept recording as Colton stormed down the stairs, knocking family photos off the wall as he went. His voice echoed through the house, shouting about lawyers and lawsuits. Then the front door slammed so hard the entire house shook, and his car engine roared to life outside. His tires squealed as he peeled out of our driveway, going much too fast for our quiet street. My husband came back upstairs with his face still white as paper. He looked at me, at Delia, and at Micah, and said we needed to go to the master bedroom to talk. We moved down the hallway like people in shock. Delia sat on the edge of our bed in her pajamas, her shaved head catching the morning light from the window. Micah climbed up beside her and took her hand. I stood in front of my husband and demanded to know what Colton had meant. My husband sat heavily on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked up and told us that 2 weeks earlier, he had noticed bruises on Delia's wrist during dinner. He had gone to the school the next day to confront Colton after practice. He admitted he found Colton in the parking lot, grabbed him by the collar, shoved him against his car, and told him that if he ever touched Delia again, he would end him. Colton's car had a dash cam that ran even while the car was parked. It recorded the whole thing, including the threat. My husband explained that Colton played the video for him right there on his phone and said that if he interfered again, he would send it to the police and press charges for assaulting a minor. My husband's voice was thick with shame as he said he had been terrified of making everything worse for Delia. He had been trying to watch more closely after that, but Colton had already made him feel trapped. Anger bubbled up in my chest, tangled with fear until I could barely breathe. I told him we had to call the police right now, not later, not after prom, not after we thought about it, right now. We had photos of bruises, a recording of Colton planning to assault her, threats, and months of whatever Delia had been hiding. My husband nodded, but I could see he was still afraid of the dashcam video. He said, Colton's father really was a lawyer, and a nasty one. Delia started sobbing harder and said she did not want her dad to get in trouble because of her. She kept saying it was her fault for dating Colton in the first place. Micah crawled into Delia's lap and wrapped his little arms around her neck. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes and said, "None of this is your fault. Bad people do bad things, and that's on them, not on the people they hurt." I do not know where my 8-year-old learned to say something that true, but it broke me. I picked up my phone and called the non-emergency police line. When the dispatcher answered, I explained that we needed to report domestic violence involving my teenage daughter. My voice shook as I told her about the bruises, the recording, and the threat of what Colton planned to do after prom. She said she was sending an officer to take our statements and asked if we were safe. I told her Colton had left but had threatened us. She told us to stay inside, lock the doors, and wait for officers to arrive. While we waited, I asked Delia for her phone. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. I started reading Colton's messages, and each one made me feel sicker than the last. The texts went back months. There were messages telling her what to wear and who she was allowed to talk to. There were apologies after he hurt her, but they were not real apologies. They blamed her for making him angry. There were threats about what would happen if she ever tried to leave. One message said he would make sure everyone at school knew she was worthless if she broke up with him. Another said he owned her, and she had better remember it. A month earlier, he had told her he had been outside her window the night she went to a friend's house without telling him, and that he had seen everything. There was another message warning that if she embarrassed him at prom, he would make sure she paid for it afterward. One night, he had sent 40 messages in a row because she had not answered fast enough. Each one was angrier than the last, and the final one said, "You'll be sorry." Then I found photos he had sent of other girls with captions like, "This could be you if you don't fix your attitude." My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. As I took screenshots and sent them to myself, I could not stop looking at Micah. There was something terrifying about the fact that my 8-year-old had been gathering evidence, while the adults in his life missed what was happening. He had photos. He had a recording. He had a plan. He had been carrying all of that alone, waiting for the one moment when he thought he could stop Colton. I asked him why he had not just told us. His little face crumpled. He said he had tried for weeks, but whenever he said Colton was mean, or that Delia was scared, we thought he was jealous because Delia was spending so much time with her boyfriend. I felt like I had been punched. Delia watched me with tears running down her face and kept apologizing over and over. My husband pulled her against him and told her she had nothing to be sorry for. He said we should have seen the signs and protected her better. I took more photos of her injuries for evidence. She lifted her shirt slowly, showing bruises across her ribs that made my vision blur. Some were dark purple, some were yellow and fading. There were more on her back. I documented each one while she stared at the floor. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang again, and this time it was 2 police officers. I let them in and brought them upstairs. I showed them Micah's recording first. As Colton's voice played from that cheap little watch, the younger officer's face went hard. He asked for a copy immediately. They took notes while Delia showed them her bruises, and I scrolled through the controlling text messages. The officers called for a detective because the recording involved a planned assault and minors. We waited downstairs while they made calls and filled out paperwork. Detective Alicia Reyes arrived 45 minutes later, wearing jeans and a blazer, like she had been called in on her day off. She introduced herself calmly and said she specialized in cases like this. Then she asked to interview each of us separately. She started with Delia upstairs in her bedroom. The rest of us sat in the living room. I could hear their voices but not the words, and the interview went on for nearly an hour. Every minute felt like a punishment for all the things I had failed to notice. When it was my turn, I brought Detective Reyes everything I had. My phone with the photos, Delia's phone with the messages, Micah's smartwatch, and the screenshots I had already sent to myself. She examined each piece carefully and told me we had done the right thing by documenting everything and calling immediately. She asked about Colton's family. I told her his father was Roland Vance, a lawyer with a large practice downtown. She wrote that down and asked whether Colton had threatened us before. I told her what he said about ruining our family and about his father destroying us. Then she interviewed my husband. He told her the truth about grabbing Colton by the collar 2 weeks earlier. He explained he had seen fresh bruises on Delia's wrist and lost his temper. Detective Reyes did not excuse it, but she said she understood the protective instinct and would note the context in her report. When she interviewed Micah, my little boy sat up straight and explained in his serious voice why he had shaved Delia's head. He said he knew it was wrong, but he had to keep his sister safe from the bad boyfriend who was going to hurt her worse at prom. Detective Reyes actually softened when she spoke to him. She told him he had been brave for trying to protect his sister, even though cutting her hair was not the right way to do it. Then she recommended that we take Delia to the emergency room right away to have her injuries documented by medical staff. She gave me her business card and said she would be in touch after she interviewed Colton and his family. We drove to the hospital in silence. Except for Micah asking from the back seat whether he was going to jail for cutting Delia's hair, no one knew how to answer. At the emergency room, they took us back quickly once I explained we were there for domestic violence documentation. The doctor was a woman with a gentle voice. She examined each bruise, measured them with a ruler, and had a nurse photograph everything. Delia squeezed my hand so hard it hurt when they asked about the bruises on her stomach. She had to explain that Colton hit her there because no one would see. By the end of the exam, they had documented 19 separate bruises in different stages of healing. A social worker came in while we waited for discharge papers. She carried a folder full of domestic violence resources and spoke to Delia like she was fragile but not broken. She explained that the hospital was required to report this to the authorities, which we had already done, and gave us referrals for therapy and support groups. She talked to Delia about safety planning and what to do if Colton tried to contact her. We were signing the discharge papers when my husband's phone rang. Roland Vance's name appeared on the screen. My husband answered and put it on speaker without saying anything. Roland's voice came through loud and furious. He said we were going to pay for making false accusations against his son. He threatened to sue us for defamation and said we would lose everything. The social worker's eyes widened. She pulled out her own phone and started recording while Roland kept ranting about how we would regret messing with his family. My husband finally said, "We are at the hospital documenting Colton's abuse," and hung up. The social worker said she would add the recording to the file as evidence of witness intimidation. We left the hospital around noon. My husband kept checking the mirrors like he expected someone to follow us. When we turned onto our street, I saw Colton's black car parked across from our house with the engine running. My hands started shaking again. I grabbed Detective Reyes's card and called her number. She answered on the second ring and told us to drive past the house and park somewhere safe while she sent a patrol car. We pulled into the grocery store parking lot 2 blocks away and waited. 10 minutes later, she called back and said officers were at our house and we could return. When we got there, 2 police cars had Colton blocked in. One officer was at his window writing something while Colton sat inside with his arms crossed, looking furious. The officer told us Colton claimed he was just driving by, but they had warned him he was not allowed near our property or any member of our family. They took photos of his car and added the incident to the case file. Colton peeled out when they let him leave, and the officers stayed until we were safely inside. That evening, while I was making dinner that none of us really wanted to eat, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. It was Denise Whitlow from the school counseling office. She said she had heard what happened from another staff member and wanted to know how Delia was doing. She offered to arrange for Delia's assignments to be sent home so she would not fall behind while we figured out what came next. I thanked her because Delia was nowhere near ready to face school. An hour later, Detective Reyes called with an update. She had spoken to Owen, the boy hosting the after-prom party. Owen got nervous and admitted Colton had asked him to make sure Delia's drinks were extra strong that night. He also said Colton mentioned getting something special from his brother to slip into them. Detective Reyes said Owen was scared and cooperating now that he understood how serious it was. She had also looked into Colton's older brother, Cody Vance, who had 3 arrests involving drugs, including selling pills to kids at the community college. She was working with a judge to get a warrant to search Colton's phone and car. The next morning, a woman from Child Protective Services called. She said they needed to do a home visit because minors were involved in a domestic violence situation, and because Micah had witnessed so much. My stomach dropped, even though I knew we had not done anything wrong. She scheduled the visit for the next day and said it was standard procedure to make sure the children were safe. That night was awful. Every car that passed made us jump. My husband got up 3 times to check the locks on the doors and windows. Around midnight, I heard crying from Delia's room. I opened her door and found both kids in her bed. Micah had crawled in beside his big sister, and they were holding each other like the rest of the world might come through the walls if they let go. Delia's face was wet with tears, and Micah was rubbing her back the same way she used to rub his when he had nightmares. I sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the air above Delia's shaved head because I still did not know how to touch it without hurting her feelings. Eventually, they both fell asleep. The CPS worker arrived at 9 the next morning with a clipboard and a serious expression. She interviewed each child separately in their rooms, while my husband and I sat in the kitchen feeling like defendants in our own home. She spent almost an hour with Delia, asking if she felt safe with us, if anyone in the house hurt her, and whether she had been afraid to tell us about Colton. Then she spoke with Micah, who apparently explained everything about why he cut Delia's hair and showed her the pictures he had taken. When the worker finished, she actually smiled. She said she found no concerns about our parenting and that we were handling the crisis well. She also said she was struck by how protective the kids were of each other. Before she left, she gave us pamphlets about trauma in children and encouraged us to get both Delia and Micah into therapy. An hour later, a beat-up truck I did not recognize slowed in front of our house and idled there for a full minute. I got the plate number on my phone and sent it to Detective Reyes. She called back and told me the truck was registered to Cody Vance, Colton's older brother. That evening, the truck came back. This time, Cody got out and stood on the sidewalk across from our house, with his hands in his pockets, just staring at our front windows. Micah saw him first and grabbed my arm so hard I could feel him shaking. I called Detective Reyes, and she had a patrol car there in under 10 minutes. But Cody was gone by the time the officers arrived. He left nothing behind except a crushed cigarette on the sidewalk, which one officer bagged anyway. Detective Reyes told me the intimidation was building a pattern and that every incident strengthened our case, but that did not make it easier to sleep. My husband sat by the front window until almost 3 in the morning with his phone in his hand, watching the street. The next afternoon, I received a call from a woman named Corinne Buckley, a victim advocate assigned to help us. She explained that we could file for an emergency protective order to keep Colton away from Delia legally. She walked me through the paperwork over the phone and told me to gather every piece of evidence we had. We spent 2 hours going through the photos, the text messages, the hospital documentation, the police reports, Micah's recording, and the recording of Roland Vance threatening us. Corinne said our case was strong and that a judge would probably grant the order quickly. The next day, a certified letter arrived from Roland Vance's law office. My husband opened it at the kitchen table, and his face turned red as he read. The letter was 3 pages of legal threats. It claimed we had assaulted his son and made false accusations that damaged Colton's reputation. It said we would be sued for everything we had if we did not drop the charges immediately. It also brought up the incident at the school, accusing my husband of assaulting a minor. My husband's hands were shaking as he photographed every page and sent them to Detective Reyes. She called back within minutes and said the letter was excellent evidence of witness intimidation. She told us to save the original and document every threat that came after it. Monday morning came too fast. Delia had to return to school wearing a beanie over her shaved head. I drove her myself because she was too scared to take the bus and face everyone staring. The parking lot was already buzzing when we arrived. I could see kids pointing from inside cars and through the school windows. Delia grabbed my hand so tightly it hurt as we walked through the front doors together. The whispers started immediately. One girl said Delia was making everything up for attention. Another group moved closer, and one boy muttered that Colton was a jerk and that he believed her. The principal was waiting in the main office with Denise Whitlow from the counseling department. Denise took us into her office and showed Delia a new class schedule with different routes through the building. She explained that security guards would be watching for Colton, and they had changed Delia's locker to a different hallway. Then she walked us through the new path to each class and showed Delia a safe room she could use if she felt scared or overwhelmed. While we were walking, my phone rang. It was Detective Reyes. She said the warrant had gone through, and officers had searched Colton's car that morning. They found a small bag stuffed under the driver's seat. The pills inside were being rushed to the lab, but she was pretty sure what they were. Within 2 hours, Colton was in handcuffs, being walked out of his house while neighbors watched from their driveways. Detective Reyes called again later and told me he had been charged with possession of controlled substances and conspiracy connected to the plan for prom night. His father bailed him out before dinner. But now there was an official case number and real charges. 3 days later, we sat in a courtroom for the emergency protective order hearing with Corinne Buckley beside us. I had to stand in front of a judge and explain everything. The bruises, the recording, the threats, the texts, Colton showing up outside our house, Cody standing across the street, and Roland Vance trying to scare us into silence. Delia sat beside my husband, shaking in her chair. The judge listened to Micah's recording of Colton talking about what he planned to do after prom. With every word, his face got harder. Colton's lawyer tried to argue that this was teenage drama blown out of proportion. He tried to make it sound like Delia was emotional, like Micah was confused, like my husband was violent, and like Colton was a good kid being destroyed by overprotective parents. The judge was not buying it. He asked my husband about grabbing Colton's collar at the school. My husband admitted it, and explained that he had seen bruises on his daughter and reacted out of fear and anger. The judge said he understood a father's reaction, but focused on the documented pattern of abuse and threats. He granted the temporary restraining order right there. Colton was not allowed within 500 feet of Delia. The next week, the school held its own disciplinary hearing about Colton's behavior on campus. The principal reviewed the evidence, including the criminal charges, the text messages, and reports of Colton's aggressive behavior in the halls. The school suspended him immediately, pending the investigation, and banned him from school property, including graduation. Roland Vance stood up and yelled about lawsuits, but the school board did not back down. Delia started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping teenagers who had been hurt by dating partners. During the first few sessions, she mostly cried. She could barely say Colton's name. Slowly, she started talking about how he made her feel worthless, how he isolated her from her friends, how she was always scared and never knew what would set him off. She talked about the gifts he bought after hurting her and how he would say he loved her too much to control himself. The therapist helped her understand that none of it was love and none of it was her fault. Abusers are good at making victims believe they deserve what is happening to them. Our whole family started going to therapy once a week too. The therapist explained that Micah had seen his sister in danger and taken the only action his child's brain could imagine. Cutting Delia's hair was wrong, but it came from love and fear mixed together. Micah told the therapist he had watched Colton hurt Delia for months and felt too small to stop it. When he heard the recording about prom night, shaving her head became the only plan he could think of to make sure she stayed home. Therapy forced us to have conversations we should have had long before that morning. We learned how to ask hard questions without blaming the person answering. We practiced listening when someone said they were afraid. Delia and Micah did exercises together where they could share their fears in a safe way. I learned that I had mistaken warning signs for teenage moodiness. I had seen Delia become quieter, dress differently, answer messages too fast, cancel plans with friends, and I had told myself it was normal relationship drama. My husband had to work through his guilt over not seeing the abuse sooner, and his shame over confronting Colton in a way that gave Colton leverage. The therapist reminded us that trauma affects whole families. We all needed time to heal from what Colton had done to Delia and what his threats had done to the rest of us. She gave us homework between sessions, journaling, nightly family check-ins, and simple rules like no one leaving the table angry without saying what they needed. It was hard, awkward work, but I could see Delia slowly beginning to feel safer in her own home. 3 weeks later, Detective Reyes called while I was making dinner and asked if she could stop by with updates. She arrived within the hour and sat at our kitchen table with her notebook open. 2 other girls from Colton's school had come forward after hearing what happened to Delia. Neither one wanted to press charges, but both described the same pattern. The charm at first, then the isolation, then the grabbing, the pushing, the apologies, and the expensive gifts afterward to keep them quiet. One girl had dated him 2 years earlier and said she broke up with him after he grabbed her by the throat at a party. She told Detective Reyes that Colton's parents had paid her family to keep quiet at the time. The other girl had dated him right before Delia. She said Colton had a routine, flowers and sweet notes at the beginning. Then he slowly cut her off from friends. Then came the grabbing and pushing. Then came the gifts. When she tried to warn Delia at school the previous fall, Colton spread a rumor about her so vicious that she transferred districts. When Delia heard that, she went very quiet. Later that night, she told me she remembered that girl trying to talk to her by the lockers. She remembered Colton pulling her away and saying the girl was crazy and jealous. Delia cried for a long time and kept saying she wished she had listened. I held her and told her that the only person responsible for any of this was Colton. Detective Reyes said the fact that his parents had covered for him before would matter because it showed this was not a mistake. It was a pattern, and his family had been protecting that pattern for years. The next morning, the district attorney's office called. They were moving forward with multiple charges, including assault, conspiracy related to the prom night plan, and possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. Roland Vance had already hired 3 lawyers from one of the most expensive firms in the state, but the prosecutor told us the evidence was strong. Delia sat beside me during the call, and when she heard she might have to testify, her whole body went tense. After I hung up, she sat silently for a long time before saying she wanted to do it. Other girls needed to know they could speak up too. She said she was not going to let Colton make her stay silent anymore. My husband met with a lawyer about the school parking lot incident, where he had grabbed Colton's collar. The lawyer reviewed the evidence and said that given the context, especially Colton's own recorded plan to hurt Delia, no reasonable prosecutor would pursue charges against a father who had been trying to protect his daughter. The lawyer sent Roland Vance a letter saying any further threats or attempted legal action would be treated as harassment and that we would pursue our own remedies if he did not stop. Meanwhile, Micah started seeing a child therapist twice a week. He had guilt over shaving Delia's head, even though he had done it to protect her. The therapist explained that he had been carrying the weight of knowing about Delia's abuse for months. He felt helpless, unheard, and terrified, which was why he took such drastic action once he learned about the prom night plan. After a few sessions, the therapist suggested a restorative program so Micah could make amends in a healthy way. He wrote Delia a 3-page letter apologizing for cutting her hair, explaining how scared he had been and how he did not know any other way to keep her safe that night. Micah also started coming with me to the local domestic violence shelter to help sort donations and put together care packages for kids who had to leave their homes quickly. He was quiet during those visits, but he took the work seriously. He folded tiny shirts, matched socks, packed toothbrushes, and asked whether the kids there had big sisters too. 2 months into the court process, Colton violated the protective order through his friends. The first time, Delia came home shaking and showed me a note one of Colton's teammates had shoved into her locker. It said Colton missed her and wanted to work things out. We photographed it and reported it to Detective Reyes, who added it to the case file and warned Colton that any more violations could lead to arrest. But it kept happening. Different friends left notes in Delia's books or tried to corner her in the hallway and tell her to give Colton another chance. Each time, we documented everything. Each time, we filed another report. Colton was showing that even with a court order in place, he still believed boundaries did not apply to him. Then one afternoon, Delia texted me from school. She had seen Colton himself sitting in his car across the street from the parking lot, watching the front doors as students came out. I called Detective Reyes and stayed on the phone with her while I drove to the school, much faster than I should have. My heart pounded the entire way. By the time I arrived, Colton was gone, but the school security camera had caught his car clearly. He had parked well within the 500 feet forbidden by the order. Detective Reyes said this was the violation she needed: direct, documented, and with Delia as a witness. She filed to have his bail revoked that same day. His father's lawyers fought hard, and the judge did not revoke bail, but he ordered Colton to wear an ankle monitor, follow a curfew, and stay away from Delia completely. The judge warned him that one more step out of line would put him in a cell until trial. For a few weeks, the notes stopped. His friends stopped showing up. For the first time, I let myself believe we might finally breathe. Then Delia found a single dead rose taped to her locker. There was no note, there was no proof, but we all knew exactly who it was from. During that same period, Delia began attending a support group at the hospital for teenagers who had been hurt by boyfriends or girlfriends. At first, she sat in the circle and listened. Eventually, she started speaking. She met a girl whose ex-boyfriend had broken her arm, and another whose girlfriend had locked her in closets when she got angry. They understood what it was like to love someone who hurt you. They understood the shame, the confusion, the fear that no one would believe you, and the way people dismissed it as drama because the abuser was young or popular or came from a good family. 6 months after the morning Micah shaved Delia's head, the criminal trial began downtown. Colton's lawyer tried to paint him as a good kid from a respectable family who had made some mistakes in a teenage relationship but did not deserve to have his future ruined. The prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece: the photos of Delia's bruises, the hospital records, the text messages, Micah's recording, the pills found in Colton's car, Owen's statement, and the accounts from the other girls. When it was time for Delia to testify, she wore the dress she had been supposed to wear to prom. That was her choice. Her hair had started growing back by then, soft and short under the courtroom lights, and she walked to the witness stand with her head high even though I could see her hands shaking. She spoke clearly. She told the jury how Colton grabbed her arms hard enough to leave marks. She told them how he pushed her into walls when he was angry and hit her stomach where clothing would hide the bruises. She described being afraid all the time, never knowing what would set him off, never knowing whether a late text or the wrong outfit or a conversation with the wrong person would make him hurt her. She talked about how he bought jewelry and flowers afterward, how he cried and said he loved her too much, how he made her feel guilty for making him lose control. The prosecutor then called Micah. My little boy walked to the stand in his best clothes, wearing a button-up shirt with tiny dinosaurs on it. The bailiff had to lower the microphone for him. Micah raised his right hand and promised to tell the truth in that serious voice children use when they understand something is important. The prosecutor played Micah's recording. The whole courtroom went quiet, as Colton's own voice filled the room, talking about what he planned to do to Delia at Owen's party. I watched the jurors' faces change as they heard him say he would make sure she could not say no, and that a baby would keep her around before college. One older woman on the jury put her hand over her mouth. Another man shook his head and looked disgusted. Colton's lawyer jumped up and argued that the recording was illegal because Colton did not know he was being recorded. The judge cut him off. She said Micah made the recording in his own home, where Colton had no expectation of privacy and the evidence would stand. Colton's face turned bright red. He leaned toward his lawyer and started whispering frantically, but his lawyer only shook his head. The prosecutor asked Micah why he recorded Colton. Micah looked at the jury and said he had seen the bruises on Delia and wanted proof because grown-ups do not always believe kids. I had to press my fist against my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. 2 days later, my husband testified. His hands shook as he sat down. He told the court about finding bruises on Delia and confronting Colton at school. He admitted he grabbed Colton's collar and threatened him. He did not try to make himself look better. He said he had been scared for his daughter and had reacted badly. The prosecutor showed how Colton used that incident to threaten our family and keep my husband quiet, making it another part of his manipulation. Colton's lawyer tried to make my husband look like the real aggressor, but by that point the jury had heard too much. The emergency room doctor testified next. She walked the jury through all 19 bruises she had documented, explaining in careful medical language how the placement and pattern were consistent with deliberate strikes to areas clothing would cover. She held up the ruler photos one by one. I saw the same older juror look away from the screen. Then Owen took the stand. He was so nervous he could barely speak above a whisper, but under oath he admitted Colton had asked him to make Delia's drink stronger and had bragged that his brother was getting him something to make sure she would not remember the night. Colton's lawyer tried to shake him, but Owen only kept saying, "I'm sorry, I should have told someone." By the third day of testimony, after the detective spoke about the drugs found in Colton's car and the 2 other girls described their experiences with him, it felt like every piece of truth that had been buried was finally being dragged into the light. I kept thinking about how many people had nearly looked away. Us, the school, Owen, the girls before Delia, even Micah when we failed to listen. But somehow, at the moment it mattered most, the truth had gathered itself into something too big for Roland Vance and his lawyers to bury. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. We waited in the hallway, drinking bad coffee from the vending machine and jumping every time a door opened. When they called us back in, the foreman stood and read the verdicts. Guilty on all the major charges, including assault, conspiracy related to the prom-night plan, and possession of controlled substances. Colton's face went white. His mother started crying. Roland Vance sat rigid with his jaw clenched, looking less like a grieving father than a man furious that money had failed him. 3 weeks later, at sentencing, the judge gave Colton 2 years in juvenile detention, followed by 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order keeping him away from Delia. We later heard he had already been picking fights with smaller kids while waiting for sentencing, which made the judge's warnings about anger and control feel even more necessary. After the hearing, Roland Vance cornered us in the parking lot. His face was red as he threatened appeals and civil lawsuits, saying we had ruined his son's future over teenage relationship drama. My husband stepped toward him, calm in a way that was colder than yelling, and said, "Your son is a predator who finally got caught. Maybe if you had been a better father, none of this would have happened." Roland looked like he wanted to hit him, but there were police officers everywhere, so he got into his car and drove away. That night, Delia crawled into Micah's bed the way he used to crawl into hers during thunderstorms. I stood in the doorway and watched my son wrap one arm around his big sister, like he had been guarding her all along. She whispered something to him, and they both laughed for the first time in months. That was when I finally understood what Micah had known before any of us did. He had seen the danger. He had listened when we did not. He had gathered proof because he believed adults needed evidence before they believed children. He had made a terrible choice, one that hurt his sister in a way he would spend a long time trying to repair, but he made it because he thought it was the only way to keep her alive and safe through that night. Delia's hair grew back. Not quickly enough for her, but it grew. Therapy did not erase what Colton did, but it helped her stop carrying the blame for it. Micah learned that protecting someone did not mean hurting them first, and we learned that listening to children is not optional just because their words sound dramatic or inconvenient. Our family changed after that morning. We became more careful, more honest, and more willing to ask questions that made us uncomfortable. And as strange as it still feels to say, my son shaving his sister's head in her sleep the night before prom really was the best thing he ever did.